Welcome to the final part of 3 presentations which together cover the route of the Cemetery Railway from Brookwood Station through to South Station. My name is John Clark and I have been researching and writing on the Cemetery Railway for many years. This programme covers what you can see in the South Cemetery and covers the route from Cemetery Pales through to the terminus of the railway at South Station. We start this section of our journey at the site of the level crossing with Cemetery Pales. The previous programme covered the section of the railway running through the North Cemetery, and this view shows the route the line took from Cemetery Pales looking in the direction of North Station and the main line. In the opposite direction, across Cemetery Pales, we can see the entrance to the South Cemetery through the gates to the right. You can also see how the railway ran across the road and between the 2 pillars of shrubbery almost directly opposite, where the white sign for Beards is. A surviving fragment of the level crossing arrangements is shown by the low brick pier with a capping stone at the end of the wall to the left of the picture. This pier used to be taller and was one of the gateposts for one of the level crossing gates. The area shown opposite, more or less where the parked car is, was the site of another accident on the Cemetery Railway. This took place on Friday the 13th of May 1938, when the Necropolis train, proceeding at a walking pace and with one of the hearse carriages leading, collided with one of the Necropolis Company's lorries just leaving the masonry works to the left of the railway line. The driver, an employee of the London Necropolis Company and who should have known better, somehow failed to notice the funeral train being propelled through the cemetery at this point. The force of the collision meant the lorry was overturned and the hearse van partly rode over it. Fortunately, the driver escaped with minor cuts and bruises, but the hearse carriage was damaged, along with the end of the third-class brake, which was immediately behind it. The mourners on the Necropolis train were taken by car to Brookwood Station, where they completed their journey to London by an ordinary train. The next view is taken opposite the Bagheera Muslim burial ground just inside the South Cemetery. We are looking at the site of the former statuary and masonry works of the London Necropolis Company. To be more accurate, the building you can see on the left formed the works buildings. The other part you can see to the right is a later extension added by the current owners. The original building was L-shaped in plan, and the end wall on the left, with the 2 sets of windows, was adjacent to the stone cutting machinery. This masonry works was opened in the early years of the 20th century and replaced and surpassed the limited facilities previously provided adjacent to the cemetery superintendent's offices in the North Cemetery. The covered workshops in the L-shaped building were linked by a narrow gauge railway upon which wheel trolleys allowed blocks of stone to be moved from one section to another as the monument was completed. In front of this building was the masonry yard area, usually full of assorted blocks of stone and marble. It included a derrick or tripod crane which was used to move the larger blocks around. Directly in front of this was a single siding off the Cemetery Railway itself that fed back into the yard from the right. The buffer stop for the siding was at the Cemetery Pales, or left-hand end of the yard. The siding was provided with a low unloading platform, and nearby was a small water tower. In the next photograph, you can see the other end of the masonry yard, with its boundary wall surrounding one of the existing redwoods within the yard area. The right-hand end of this wall has a brick pillar surmounted by a capping stone. This used to act as a gate post for the gates leading into the yard off the cemetery railway. The London Necropolis Company continued to operate the masonry works through until the 1960s, when the premises were leased to the masonry firm of Clements and Son, who later purchased the site. When Clements ceased trading in the early 1980s, the premises were acquired by a firm of architectural consultants who converted the former works into offices. And there have been several owners since then, beards having considerably extended the original buildings. Continuing further into the South Cemetery, the next part of the cemetery railway route is now occupied by the Ismaili Cemetery, which lies just beyond the masonry works. From here, the route of the railway is easy to follow, as the council has recently removed the undergrowth and trees which used to be maintained as a low boundary hedge flanking the railway, but which had grown considerably since the late 1970s. This view is taken from beyond the entrance buildings of the Ismaili burial ground, and all of the graves you can see are partly on the former trackbed. The removal of the undergrowth means that the slightly raised trackbed can be clearly seen. Note also the avenue of redwoods, which follows and flanks the railway route. In fact, the whole course of the private line is flanked by these magnificent trees, but it is most noticeable and has the greatest impact in the South Cemetery. The following pictures reinforce this point. The next photograph is taken further along this sweeping curve of the railway trackbed towards its terminus at South Station. The trackbed in this section is more clearly defined because it remains largely undisturbed. Note the church of the St Edward Brotherhood in the centre background. The next view is taken near the boundary with the St Edward Brotherhood and looks back towards Cemetery Pales and the main line. Note the Finn Brain mausoleum carefully located between two redwoods on the right. This picture also emphasises the sweeping curve of the railway at this point, along with the Redwood Avenue. Recently, the cemetery management has marked the location of the railway by inserting granite sets into the tarmac of St Andrews Avenue. The sets represent the two rails of the railway track. Beside the road is another interpretation board, which is placed directly on the route of the railway. In the other direction is the boundary fence of the St Edward Brotherhood. The railway ran directly alongside what is now the St Edward the Martyr Church, previously the second Church of England chapel and designed by Cyril Tubbs and Arthur Messer, and the old mortuary building, which was previously the original Church of England chapel, designed by Sidney Smirke and dating from 1854. Beyond this building is the site of South Station and the monastic house. The platform here is longer than that of North Station and has a conventional ramp this end, which led directly from the platform to the original chapel building. The low yew hedge surrounding the monastic house was planted to represent the outline plan of the building of South Station. The monastic house, which was completed in 2008, sits squarely on the site of the former station courtyard, and only the end gables intrude into the plan of the former station buildings. The station building, designed by Sidney Smirke, architect to the London Necropolis Company, was a replica of North Station. Therefore, the platform edge also has a dip as part of its design. Part of the dip is shown in this photograph, where you can see the square-edged blue bricks to the right, with the round-edged bricks to the left. This feature is much easier to see here at South Station, as there is no fence or hedge to interrupt the view. Because of this, it is also possible to see in this photograph how the first course of red bricks beneath the Staffordshire blue bricks decreases from the full depth of a brick to the right down to about 1/2 the depth to the left as the dip increases along the platform. The platform here is longer than that at North Station, and part of the extension can be seen here. The exact date of the extension is unknown, but it was almost certainly built to permit the discrete loading or unloading of equipment from the Necropolis train, which could be done at the further end of the platform beyond the station building. And this presumably took place once funeral parties had left the station precincts. Note how the extension to the platform uses only red bricks, even for the platform edge, and note how these appear more damaged than the blue bricks seen previously. The yew hedge behind shows this extension began before the left-hand end of the station building ends, which possibly indicates that this end of the platform was rebuilt at the same time. The platform continues beyond this point until it finishes in the general level of land just short of the cemetery boundary wall with the A322. South Station therefore has only one platform ramp and no steps. Looking back along the platform, we can see the site of the station building indicated by the low yew hedge, along with the original Anglican chapel. We can also see how the railway line ran directly ahead back towards Cemetery Pales, following the route we have just followed. Note also the large tree stump on the extreme right. This used to be a huge cedar of Lebanon, which was planted for the opening of the cemetery in 1854. Unfortunately, in August 2018, it split apart, and as a safety precaution, the Brotherhood arranged to have it cut down shortly afterwards. It is a sad loss to the cemetery landscape. And this brings us to the terminus not only of the Cemetery Railway, but also this short series of programmes in which we have followed the route of the railway from Brookwood Station to this point. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I leave you with details of my history of the Cemetery Railway alongside the self-guided booklet published by the Brookwood Cemetery Society, which allows you to explore this route on your own.